All right. Good morning, everybody. You are listening to the Misty podcast, Into the Cauldron. I'm Chris, as your usual host. And today I have one of my absolute favorite guests, a person who I'm sure really needs no introduction. His work on ceremonial magic, especially, is absolutely monumental. It's been instrumental in my practice, and I think for a lot of other occultists in general. I don't know what the ceremonial landscape or modern occultism would really look like without his work. He's also done a lot of work on feng shui, and really a lot of major Western books on feng shui are very, very excellent in themselves. So I'm sure this is a man that has been requested time and time again, but Dr. Stephen Skinner is with us today, and I'm really, really excited. Stephen, hi.
Hi. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to talk to somebody like yourself.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, what honor. Yeah. So I mean, this is just like I said, we were just talking before I started recording this, and it is all a bit surreal for me because I don't know if you can see actually, Steve, but I've got like a bunch of your books on my bookshelf behind me here. So it is all a bit surreal to me because I've been following your work for a very, very long time. And it really is, I think, one of the best reconstructions of ceremonial magic that I've found.
Thank you.
It's absolutely incredible. It's one of those things. Ceremonial. How would you, as a whole, do you think, for people who have never heard of you or your work or ceremonial magic, really, what would you how would you introduce it to them? Do you think?
Well, any kind of magic is interesting. The thing about magic is that it's a method. It's not woo-woo. It's not fantasy. It has various steps. If you carry them out, I was going to say religiously, but that's not appropriate, then you will quite often get results. And once you've got the hang of it, then you will get results 80 to 90% of the time. And that's as good as any scientific experiment. My father-in-law was a professor of chemistry, and at one stage he said, well, it's true that 10%, 15% of the time, reactions that you expect from it don't happen or they fail. So magic and science have got about the same score.
Yeah, I think this is where, in my opinion, because I've sort of come at this from two different ways. I started with an academic background, and when I left academia, I hugely went the other way, and I just stove straight into spiritual communities, occult communities. But a lot of the early communities that I dived into, spiritually speaking, are all very kind of new age. We were talking about the law of attraction, manifestation, all that kind of thing. And again, I'm sure some people will get results with that kind of thing. I'm not going to knock it, right? I'm not like that. But for me, magic, especially ceremonial magic, is something that I keep coming back to because it is such a logical system. And I don't think people give that enough credit when you hear the word magic or in popular consciousness, right? We tend to think that it is very woo-woo, or it's kind of a precursor of science or something.
Or worse than that, it's a sort of psychology that if you put these things up on your mirror and think this and say it twice, 15 times before breakfast, then something will happen. Well, if you're focusing your mind on something and you do those sort of operations, then your chances will be improved. You're more likely to get a job if you've been thinking about it and concentrating on them before going to the interview. But they don't have the one-to-one effect that magic has. Because you and I as human beings have got a limited number of powers. You just can't do many things that are sometimes talked about as magical.
Yeah.
Because magic depends on entities. It depends upon the spirits, demons, if you like. And if you can persuade them or compel them to do what you want them to do, then it will happen. Because they do have, obviously, you can't demolish a cliff or fly to the other end of the world instantly or so forth. There are a number of things in the grimoires which sound extraordinary, but actually do work. And that's something that continually gobsmacks me.
Yeah, I think, well, I suppose this is an interesting question about how results manifest, I guess, or how we can sort of attribute results. Because you look at a lot of especially the medieval and Renaissance grimoires. Some of them do have pretty weird results, pretty weird operations. There are ones we have everything from invisibility I think it's the Cambridge Necromancer Manual. There are a bunch of ones for like making illusionary castles and feasts appear out of nothing by spirits or demons, stuff like that.
I can't say I've ever succeeded in any of those.
Yeah.
But I have succeeded with invisibility and talking to animals.
Oh, wow.
So, for example, with invisibility, I have walked into a major department store. Lots of people have almost run into me because I'm just not there. And my wife has walked past me looking for me. Where is he? Where is he? Looked me in the eyes almost and kept walking because she couldn't see me. It's not the 100% invisibility where you walk into a police station, drop something on the desk and walk out again. That's not going to happen. But as long as you slow your breathing rate and stop thinking, and you do have to stop thinking to be invisible, then it works.
Yeah, so I think invisibility. I don't know, because when you think of magic, and I suppose this is one of the big things that distinguishes, I guess what we could say, I don't know if I would class it as low magic, but I guess sort of goetic magic from something like theurgy. Whereas a lot of the goals of sort of what we can say is I don't know what the best way to describe it would be, but regular magic they're very mundane goals, right? And there are lists of mundane goals, whether it's invisibility, money, fame, power, love, anything like that. They are sort of very consistent human goals. Whereas you look at something like theurgy, and it's very much more kind of apotheosis, transcendence, connecting with the divine. And there are various different sources of where that comes from. Some people say it's from the mystery traditions. I think you've argued that in a certain manner of speaking, isn't it? That theurgy is a descendant of some mystery traditions.
Theurgy and magic are not the same.
No.
So many people, particularly academics, use them as interchangeable words, and they're not. Magic is concerned with the human concerns with money, sex, girlfriends, whatever, and can achieve those things. And usually, if you're using a spirit, it's going to happen within a week or 10 days. These people who say, oh, well, I did this and 6 months later I got the job, or 6 months later something happened. Yeah, that's fantasy. That's not magic, or that's good luck or whatever. Because the results of real magic happen fast. To do magic, you've got to, as it were, pull down or pull up a spirit, an entity, and command or persuade, depending on which way you play it, them to do something. Then it will either it'll either succeed successfully or it'll fail dramatically. Yeah, you'll certainly know about it one way or the other. Spirit's a bit devious that way. But theurgy is the opposite. Theurgy is to take your own spirit, if you like, and raise it to the level of the gods. And that's what theurgy was originally concerned with, talking face to face with the gods. Theurgy is very rare. The number of theurgic rituals in the Greco-Egyptian Papyri, there are only about 3 rituals which are actually theurgy. One particularly, as you know.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few. I think we have the very, I think, personally incorrectly named mithras liturgy.
Very incorrectly named, yes.
Yeah, it's always an interesting one. I mean, who is it that came up with it? Is it Betts when he was translating it, or is it?
No, it was a guy before Betts, whose name I can't remember.
Right.
That was simply because at one point Mithra is mentioned as a god.
Right.
Big deal. That doesn't mean it's a Mithraic liturgy.
Yeah, and people they really sort of go hard on the whole thing that it's part of some Mithraic mystery cult initiation. But again, and the thing with it that always kind of is interesting to me is that Mithras is mentioned in conjunction with Helios. That's the thing. He's not even mentioned by himself in the same way that Helios is conjoined and syncretized with hundreds of other deities throughout the PGM. And when you read the section that mentions it, it's as a recall of a previous event. The thing, isn't it?
It's something that happened in the past. It's not what's currently happening.
Yeah.
And what's currently happening is the Magus or whoever is instructing his daughter how to do it, how to raise up to the level of the the pole goddess or whatever else and communicate with them directly face to face. And that's a very rare and very difficult operation.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably one of the, it's definitely one of the more complete and longer papyri, I think, in the Greek magical papyri in general. It's quite a long one, but it's full of, I mean, it's a beautiful, it is beautiful in and of itself. When you look at the whole thing, it's absolutely gorgeous, the imagery that you see. But it is very confusing. And especially I think because and this is, I guess, the other thing that I like to dispel misconceptions about. We hear, at least in the PGM, a lot of the words and the ingredients that look kind of gruesome and morbid, they're code for actually fairly
something else,
easily obtainable, usually plant or all other substances, right? And I think that kind of sheds a light maybe on some of the weirder ingredients in like the Solomonic Grimoires as well, to a certain extent. But I mean, have you found any sort of correlation between the code words in the PGM? Because they actually give it, I think, in the PGM, don't they? There is a papyrus.
Yes, it's a little bit tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
This thing is actually just I don't know, peony or something.
Yeah.
It's not snake's blood or whatever other ridiculous label. But then some of them are actual identifications of herbs. I mean, the theurgy operation that you mentioned, the key herb is kentritis.
Yeah. And I know Betts doesn't translate it, does he? I think he has a word for it.
Nobody knows what kentritis is. But there's a very detailed description of what it looks like and where it grows and so forth.
Right.
I feel that if I had greater knowledge of herbs,
like botanical knowledge,
then, or if somebody with botanical knowledge put their mind to it, they could actually figure out what it was. As long as it's a plant that still exists and hasn't been expunged from the world.
Yeah. Well, there's also, I mean, this is a continuing theme as well, but psychedelics were probably involved, or they argue that psychedelics were involved in mystery rites, and I'm kind of on the fence about it. I know the mysteries of Dionysus, or the Dionysian mysteries, there is some argument that Kekeon or whatever was somewhat psychedelic and hallucinogenic,
something related to ergot.
Yeah, because it's wine related, and when they're getting in that kind of ecstatic furrow of Dionysus, then that's what connects them to whatever. But I, personally speaking, I think theurgy would give you the same, well, not the same experience as a psychedelic, but I think it would give you an equally powerful experience, visionary wise, than just using a psychedelic. Yes. I
think if you did the fasting and that sort of thing beforehand, and regular prayers and so forth, then yes. But the way we, and I assume you as well, live these days, sometimes I think a little push is needed. And in the case of that ritual, kentritis was the push, to get you past through the doors, as it were.
Yeah.
But so I agree, and I do think that theurgy was also related to the mystery rites.
Yeah, absolutely. I think. Well, I mean, it's interesting because when we look at, I mean, it depends how. I suppose it depends how we define theurgy, because if you look at it even from an academic perspective, most of the discussion around theurgy is centered around the Chaldean oracles, right? So they sort of argue it's a very Neoplatonic doctrine. It's assigned to Iamblichus, at least, really sort of makes it into a ritualized format. That's the sort of a common belief. It's all attributed to Julian the Chaldean, Julian the Theurgist. Yeah. And the Chaldean oracles do, but one of the things that I find really interesting in Chaldean oracles is that the Greek theurgia, so the actual Greek word for theurgy, doesn't actually appear in the Chaldean oracles. The adjective theurgist does. So the ritualists are described as theurgists, but the actual word itself, theurgy, just doesn't appear in the Chaldean oracles, which I think is absolutely fascinating. But there are a bunch of what we could say are theurgic rituals in the Chaldean oracles. Then we argue, or the argument is to what extent does that relate to or have any semblance on original mystery traditions or mystery rites and that kind of thing.
Yeah, because nobody knows what actually happened in Eleusis. I've been to Eleusis, which incidentally a lot of people say doesn't exist anymore, but it's an awful lot of remains there, a lot of temple there. And I'm pretty sure that they used psychedelic herbs, and it gave people an experience that they never talked about afterwards.
Mm.
Now, that's pretty amazing. I mean, politicians can't get people to not talk about something or other afterwards. So it must have been pretty earth-shattering, the experience.
Yeah.
It isn't around anymore. But Iamblichus and the Greco-Egyptian ritual that you just mentioned, probably the closest that you'll get to having that experience.
Yeah, I suppose if we're looking at mystery rites or mystery traditions as an initiatic procedure, I guess the closest modern group would be something like Rosicrucianism or Freemasonry. That idea of going through various grades or anything like that. But even then, modern Freemasonry doesn't really do any rituals anymore. It's more of a kind of rationalist or secularist society, isn't it? It's not really a thing whether there are, and even the Rosicrucians are a bit questionable with their rituals sometimes. But
then it's a question of which Rosicrucians you mean.
Yeah, I suppose that's the other thing, whether it's all like the neo-Hermeticist sort of Golden Dawn derived orders, or it's the 1600s version that came out with the Fama Fraternitatis and all that kind of thing. But even then, that's still a bit of a questionable text, I suppose. I mean, there are tons of arguments that they, like the Rosicrucian College or whatever, laid this foundation for the Royal Society and that kind of thing, and the big collection of academics. But even again, I kind of take the viewpoint of that's, again, it's I feel like it's in the same vein as like modern conspiracy theories. It's a really interesting story, but I don't know if there's any actual weight to it.
It's a nice idea.
Yeah.
You can easily get involved in it, but I don't think it happened like that at all.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I mean, I think one of the things that keeps things like that relevant, and people keep coming back to it, because I mean, people, even since all the Rosicrucian manifestos came out, you have a bunch of people, even from the 1600s onwards, coming out saying they are Rosicrucians, or they're descended from a Rosicrucian order and the Rosicrucian mystery school. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I'd love to get your take on this. The phrase mystery school really kind of gets to me sometimes. It's a bit annoying. Because you see it in so many New Age and sort of new spiritual movements where they think that the mystery traditions were schools about raising consciousness, or you learned meditations and things in there. But that isn't really very accurate.
No, I doubt that. Yes. I mean, you can look at, say, Indian traditions where yoga can be taught in the way it's taught in the West, but it's more likely to be effective if it's taught on a one-to-one basis. Guru to Chela.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that that was also true of a lot of the theurgy. Like in that ritual again, it's the Magus teaching his daughter, not even his son, what to do, and looking back at what had happened in a previous ritual.
Yeah.
It's more likely to be on a one-to-one basis, I think.
Yeah, so like master, like I guess apprentice and master, or teacher and apprentice, or something like that, rather than like a grand school where everyone kind of gets invited and there's like assembly halls and everyone's learning meditation together. I think it's a bit, I don't know. I think it's a bit fallacical. I don't really like the idea of it, but I think people, again, it comes down to people want that sense of community. I think when you're talking about this kind of thing, because it's nice to have people with shared experiences.
Well, think about the Chinese model. For example, Chinese magicians teaching their students will have students who come in and attend lectures and things, but then they will have one or two, or at most three, what they call indoor students, who in the Chinese system will usually live in the same building, will receive the actual practical methods.
Yeah.
Everybody else receives the theory. So if there ever was a mystery school, I think it would have worked something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, I think. And I guess it opens up a bit of a wider discussion as well about the distinction between magical theory and magical practice. I mean, I'm saying it, I'm just basically quoting Crowley, I think. But there is a bit of a, obviously, even if we take the viewpoint that magic is a science, or that it's as close to a science as things are going to get, I think it does really kind of pay to, at least even from a practice point, to learn both the theory and the practical methods behind it. Because I think if you just jump in and try and figure out all the practice without learning any theory or anything like that, I think you're going to extend your learn time for like decades, and you're just not going to get anything done.
So let's look at what actually is science. I mean, nowadays science is a bit of a holy cow. And
it's become a bit of dogma, but
people look at what about the science on climate change? Well, my personal opinion is quite different because I used to teach climatology, but because that was my original degree is in geography. But science is not a holy cow; it's a method. It's just the idea that you form a hypothesis, you figure out something that might test it, you do the test, you collate the results, and then you say, oh, it wasn't true, or yes, it is true. People don't seem to be seeing that anymore. So as Crowley said, the method of science, the aim of religion, you can apply that method to magic. Work out, okay, so I have a theory that to do this, I will need to call Tapthatharas, the spirit of Mercury. And for that, I will need 3 friends and this incense and so forth and so on. And I will find the right hour to do it in, and I will go ahead and do it. Then, if it succeeds, you have something where you can say, okay, so this works, and this is a method that works, and this can be repeated with the change of the parameters, and we can experiment with it. That's being scientific. Now, the other half of Crowley's comment, the method of science, the aim of religion, I'm not quite sure that magic has anything to do with the aim of religion. Theurgy might have something to do with the aim of religion because it's coming face to face with a god, not like the god. But magic still is concerned with the everyday things that people want. And why not? Science is concerned with the everyday things that people want. You know, we didn't have transistor radios, we didn't have fly-mos, you know, whatever. Now we have. And the same with magic. There's nothing shameful about a common or garden objective, because magic can actually satisfy quite a few of those common or garden objectives.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an interesting thing again, because especially when you look at something like ceremonial magic, I mean, I use ceremonial magic as an example because it's you've done a lot of work on it, and it is, I think, one of the more structured approaches. Because again, if you look at, or maybe I should say high magic, there might be a better label for it, because even it's interesting. I was talking about this with someone on a podcast the other week, actually. But even if you look at traditional witchcraft, so sort of the folk witchcraft, the people who are practicing it, the general sort of peasantry, the general peasantry folk, they wouldn't, like, their lives were hard enough as it was, right? They wouldn't be using something if it wasn't working. These are people who had to go out, plow the fields every day. They had to bring the necks of the chickens when they were coming in, all that kind of thing. If something wasn't working for them, they didn't really have time or the luxury of ignoring it.
They would trash it. They wouldn't continue doing it.
Right.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
It's one of the arguments that I produced to explain feng shui. That you wouldn't find very rich businessmen in Hong Kong wasting their time and a lot of money hiring feng shui masters to do it for them if they weren't actually producing results.
Yeah.
And that works high or low, you know, whether it's the hedge witch looking for a particular insect or a particular herb. If it didn't work, they wouldn't continue to do it.
Right.
It's
Sorry, go on.
It's all right. I was going to be facetious and say it's probably only politicians who continue to do things that don't work, but that was just meant as a side joke.
Sure, I guess. But yeah, no, I mean, it's I suppose it's, if you know, even if you look at it from the hedge witch perspective, when they're using much more kind of natural, I guess we could say natural-based or land-based ingredients, whether it's certain warts or plants or, again, like you said, insects or anything like that. It's along the same lines, in my mind at least, it's along the same lines as like planetary association. In the same way that high magic uses corresponding incenses for certain planets, there's numerous bits of traditional law that say certain planets or certain plants and fungi or animals, certain things are all ascribed to certain planets, and it's all different planetary energies and that kind of thing. So it's the same. It's the same methodology, I think, behind everything. It's just it's being expressed slightly differently in every culture.
Yeah, the categorization is necessary.
Mm.
You can't just stand in the middle of a field and say, I want this to happen, shouted at the top of your lungs. You have to condition the space for the spiritual entity, demon, spirit, to be comfortable enough to come and actually listen to you, and then maybe do what you ask it to do.
Mm.
So you do need these correspondence tables, and Crowley did 777.
Yeah.
I amplified it in Complete Magician's tables.
Yeah. I've got it back there. It's again, anyone who hasn't got the Complete Magician's tables, I would always recommend it. It's like your handbook for all things magical. I think it's one of the biggest things I've used.
It started because I got a little bit bored with Crowley's 777. It didn't cover a lot of things. And so I decided I'll just expand it. So I was using a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then finally out this is ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, eventually this needs to be a book, and then
yes. And then the book got bigger and bigger. It's in its 5th edition now, and I'm not going to add any more to it than that.
Yeah, I think we you can draw a line under it. I think we've done enough for it.
Yes. But the information in there is useful.
Yeah.
Magic is based on those correspondences.
Right. I mean, this is I was reading Agrippa the other day. I was going back to my Agrippa, and that whole theory of universal correspondence, where like different correspondences, or at least down here in the physical world, match up with what's going on in the celestial world and certain planets and zodiacs, that kind of thing. But then all that matches up with certain thoughts and ideas or whatever whether it's the divine mind or whatever it is you want to say, if you take more of a hermetic perspective. But yeah, the theory of correspondence, and that's how it works. It's different. I assume, I guess, but we can talk about the hierarchy, I guess, of spiritual creatures here as well. But different spirits are going to be assigned to different planets, which means they partake of the same, I guess. It depends on how do you see spirits usually. I know you said you sound like you're not the biggest fan of sort of the chaos magic approach of it's all in your head.
Well, I used to run the Illuminous Club in London, which you've never heard of. But we used to do regular lectures. People like Colin Wilson, Francis King would come. And some of the early chaos magicians also turned up. And so after these talks, they'd been nattering away in great detail, trying to figure out what turned out to be chaos magic in the end. So I was privy to some of the very early constructs of chaos magic. But I have to say I didn't follow it through. I like the medieval worldview. I like the idea that there are many connections in this world, because if there wasn't, we would just be flying apart in space. The things are connected. Like Chinese medicine, you take a particular herb. Well, no, any herbal medicine, take a particular herb, it affects your liver or your kidneys or your eyes or whatever. There is a connection. So if there's a connection with herbs, there's also a connection with incense. You burn you burn a Saturnian incense and try and invoke a Venusian spirit, and you will fail. So how do you find out what you should burn? You look up a book of correspondences, like the two already mentioned.
Yeah.
And that much is scientific. Well, in fact, because it links up and it's usable. If you use the wrong thing, you put salt and chlorine together, you get nothing. You put chlorine and sodium together, you get salt. But you need to know that. So magic, you can't just go and do, I want to do magic, which I hear so many people say. Or, how do I quickly do this? I disappoint them by telling them you can't quickly do anything. You have to do, it's like you can't quickly create a garden. You've got to do a lot of digging. You've got to decide what plants you want to plant. You've got to buy the seeds and plant them. And then you get a beautiful garden. If you want magic to work, you also have to do the research. And one of my reasons for writing books was that I started off needing to get the information in one place for myself. And I realized, okay, maybe this is useful for somebody else. And then it just went on from there.
Yeah, I'm kind of, I feel like I'm where you were when back then at this point, because I'm in this sport where a lot of this platform, this company that I'm founding is exactly kind of a similar idea to that. So it's finding sources for magic, especially ceremonial magic, but ones that are archaeologically backed and stuff as well, and collating them into some kind of library. That's sort of the grand vision I have, where it's a PDF library or an online library, whatever it is, and just making the resource available for magicians online and accessible. Just digitizing manuscript or digitizing everything and just having that kind of idea. But yeah, it is I suppose it's another question, because it sounds, when you talk about all the different, it reminds me of the whole doctrine of signatures thing that Paracelsus was on about. But in a way, it does kind of sound like alchemy. You're combining substances, or would you class? I mean, it depends. Would you class alchemy as a form of magic, or would you class it as its own sort of discipline thing?
No. No, I think alchemy is a physical thing. They were definitely interested in making gold. They were definitely interested in making the universal medicine. Both these things are physical. I don't think they use very much magic. I've looked at a lot of the stuff that Dee did with alchemy, and he was concerned with the right proportion, putting it together. Again, like chemistry. So actually, you may not agree, but I would ally alchemy with chemistry. I don't believe that alchemy was the forerunner of chemistry. I'm sure that it all grew up at the same time. But certainly the universal medicine will be much more useful than being able to produce gold.
Yeah.
And it's a pity if somebody doesn't get on with that.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially again, in all sort of the modern spiritualist or modern sort of new thought ideas of alchemy. There seems to like people seem to take heavily from people like Jung and everyone like that, where they think alchemy is much more of a kind of it's designed around being a spiritual transmutation process, whereas where actually all the alchemists weren't concerned with making gold or anything. Actually, it's all a thinly veiled occult metaphor for spiritual transformation. It's like, no, I guarantee you the alchemists were trying to make gold. Everyone was very interested in doing that. I'm very interested in doing that, right? I think most people are. But again, I think it's an interesting point, because it is, I don't know how much magic is involved in alchemy, because I mean, we have certainly I don't know if it's in the Greek papyri, it might be in the Demotic papyri, but we do have a lot of alchemical things in the Greek magical papyri. There are some on
that and Zosimus and Maria the alchemist, and people like that. Yeah, but that all, they were drawings of real flasks for distillation and things like that. It wasn't there were one or two serpents eating their tail, but most of it looked like real physical stuff.
Yeah, well, on that note, then I guess the Ouroboros, because the Ouroboros is itself a magical symbol, isn't it? I think. Indeed,
it is the precursor of the magical circle on the floor. I sometimes wonder whether the ancient Egyptians actually got a serpent, live or dead, and laid it round their circle.
Yeah, so that's I mean, it have to be a pretty big serpent, I think, right? Because I don't know, like when I I guess this is me projecting my modern practice back to them, but when I try and build or construct magic circle, I like my space, so I generally go. I know that the Lesser Key of Solomon, or might be actually, well, they just be the key, or the clavicular manuscript in general. They recommend it being 9 foot in diameter.
Oh, that's right. No, that's a mistake. It's not 9 foot in diameter. 9 foot in radius.
Okay. Which makes more sense.
Actually 18 foot across. And if you doubt that, you can look at the circle, which I published in Goetia Dr. Rudd, I think, and you can actually see the 9 foot marks going from the edge to the center. And that's 9 feet. And then the circles with the names and things in it is beyond the 9 feet. So the complete circle is 20 plus across. And people don't believe me, but I promise you that is the truth.
Yeah. Because where did that come from? Because I think you hear, I know in a lot of modern translations of the Lesser Key of Solomon, they say it should be 9 foot across.
Yeah, well, Is this like some people also thought that the triangle should be whatever it was, 3 foot in the air, but it's not.
Oh yeah. I always interpret it as being 3 foot from the circle.
That's much more likely.
Yeah.
But if you look at the drawings, it's actually pretty close to the circle, because you need at some point to put the sword point across, and you don't want to be reaching right out. You want only the sword to go beyond the boundaries.
Yeah.
I take the boundaries seriously. I mean, I've never done what Crowley did, which was to sit in the triangle, which I think is the heights of madness.
That's an interesting one. Yeah, it's weird. Well, there is.
If you believe there's any truth in the circle and the triangle, that's the last thing you want to do.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. Yeah, it's. I mean, history, especially with magicians. Renaissance and early modern history is rife with tales of magicians who step outside their circles, usually because the demon or whatever appears as some beautiful woman, and then they run off chasing them, and then they're never seen again.
Basically, the least that will happen is you'll stop your magical operation.
Yeah, because
you'll discharge between the circle and outside the circle.
Whether
you also burst into flames and go to hell is another question.
You get possessed. That's always the big one that people are afraid of, isn't it? That you're going to get if you step outside. Will you start any kind of occult practice? You are opening yourself up for dark forces and possession, all that kind of thing.
Well, the Christian hierarchy would like you to believe that, so that you don't even start.
Yeah, except the vast majority of the compilers of the grimoires were the clergy in the first place.
Yes, because they knew that they knew the real background. They weren't. Maybe they were afraid of going to hell. Maybe it's worth the risk. Anyway.
Yeah, I think I don't know. The one thing that always. I mean, again, I was talking about this the other day actually, but the one thing that's always struck out to me with high magic or ceremonial magic in general, if you're doing any sort of goetic work, and I suppose this also holds true for theurgy in a manner of speaking, but more so from, if we're looking at sort of the clergy practice, ceremonial magic, especially if you're working with something like demons, or if you're calling or invoking an angel or something like that, it provides you with what is effectively very direct face-to-face proof of divinity. And I don't think you can really say that for any other spiritual systems, really. Like that, you have a lot of mystical systems or anything like that, but none of them really provide a direct face-to-face contact.
Mysticism is completely different from magic.
Yeah,
the rules of mysticism are quite different. It's one of the things that Crowley got a little bit confused, that the two are compatible. I guess I was lucky because early on in my magical career, when I was at university, actually, I did an invocation, and I got a very clear visual of something about the size of a fist, bright orange, a face, gnashing its teeth at me. And I wasn't on any kind of drugs, not even alcohol or not even coffee. This thing was so real, and it was beyond the boundary of the circle. And
was it in a scrying mirror, or like an obsidian mirror, or was it like just there,
hanging in the air like that and snarling at me,
actually just like a physical manifestation, like it wasn't in a mirror or anything?
No, because it was orange. It looked like a large orange, but it had eyes, and I mean, you don't have to believe this, and you might.
No. I think it's fascinating, but go on.
But when I saw that, I immediately chickened and did a number of banishes, which didn't work. It just hung there for a long time, glowering at me, and I thought, oh shit! But I've learned one thing from that, is that it's real and it works, and you have to take the right precautions. Yeah. Most people are saved by not taking the right precautions because they don't actually get the evocation to work. Yeah. So that's why a lot of people still think about it as a psychological.
Yeah. I think there was. I think you might have been one of the ones to say this at some point, where when you look at a lot of the charismatic approaches where they think magic is all in your head or spirits all in their head, a lot of the time, I think probably one of the main reasons that people like to think that is because they've only ever encountered spirits that are in their head. Yeah, they've never actually succeeded like full on evocations.
And it also traces back to Crowley, who said initially that in his edition of the Goetia, he said that spirits are actually part of your brain. I mean, that's mad to start with, not part of your brain. Not, he might have been acceptable to say part of your mind, but he said brain, and went on to justify it in terms of psychology, because in the early 20th century, everybody thought that
it was the big thing, wasn't it?
And it was going to explain everything, and Crowley thought it was going to explain magic. And so he did a lot of his operations with that in mind, like his version of the Abramelin operation. He only did, I think, the first 3 days or so before.
Yeah, that's I remember seeing one of my. I mean, I have, generally speaking, I have two main complaints of Crowley, and I know it's almost considered heresy nowadays in modern occult circles to denounce Crowley.
Go ahead and be a heretic.
my two main ones are one, and someone I was talking to on a podcast raised this the other week as well. That was a very good point. I think Crowley, in a way, was absolutely a genius in his own way, but I think his own tendency towards hedonism blocked him from gaining a lot of traction or doing anything that was like very transformative. I think he kind of leaned into his hedonism.
He was too busy having fun.
Yeah,
carry any of the rituals through to conclusion. I mean, just
right. That's actually that was my second complaint actually about Crowley, is that
he never finished.
It feels like a lot of his stuff isn't fully finished.
Yes, and in the case of Abramelin, he said, "Oh, I completed it, sitting on a horse, or actually it was a donkey, traveling up and down the really steep valleys behind what is now Assam, and going into China." You can't do that. Anybody who's, and I have been to Assam, so I know a little bit about this. You can't sit on a horse skidding down very dangerous pathways and concentrate on spirits. You can't call them, you can't charge them, you can't do anything, and you certainly can't incense them. So that is, and I have to call it out, that's bullshit. He never finished Abramelin.
Yeah.
And a number of other things he didn't finish, like even his 1904 reception of the Book of the Law. He started with his wife, who he'd just recently married, but who was obviously a good medium.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm going to show you I think it was the Undines, or maybe it was, anyway, it was one of the elemental spirits, soft and gentle. And so what did he use to call that spirit? He used the what is now referred to as the bornless one, but which in fact...
that's the Akephalos, right?
Yes, yeah. It's the headless god out of the papyri Greco-Egyptian. It's just... so it's worked on his basis that, it's all psychological, so if I just stimulate her brain by using a very good evocation, then, and if I say it's going to be Undines, it'll be Undines, and she won't know the difference. Now that's not said, but that was obviously going on in his head.
Yeah.
And he didn't call Undines. What happened was later she got contact with a version of Horus, I believe, and instructions for doing other rituals, which Crowley said, oh, no, that's nonsense. We can't do that. Crowley himself then sort of backed off a little bit. And the wife proceeded to give the dates and times when he should go and receive reception of the Book of the Law. Now, he says that he sat in a room and behind him, Awis was dictating. I'm absolutely certain that behind him, his wife was speaking. And she... Okay,
so you think Awas was, or she was channeling Awas?
She was channeling lots of things, not just Awas. She was... The whole reception is bits and pieces from different entities, but that's not the question. She was channeling, and she was saying it out loud, and he was scribbling for all he was worth. And then he couldn't say, it was my wife gave me this revelation, because he had to be the great magician.
Yeah.
So he said he just heard it. Yes, he just heard it. He heard it out of her mouth, and that's just unacceptable, don't you think? If you go to the medium, you should acknowledge the medium.
Yeah, you should at least as like a citation or a footnote or something.
Yeah, and he didn't. Anyway, so I've got a lot of things to say about the reception of the Book of the Law, but I'm going to save them because I'm going down to Parma to give a talk on this. On I think the 27th. It's an Italian occult conference. I'm probably the only English speaker there, and I don't speak Italian. But there will be an on-spot translator who.
Actually, this is an interesting point. Actually, on the topic of translation, I think when it comes to any kind of occult or spiritual text or anything like that, when you're working with translations, I think it's always a challenge because the translator who's working with it, they have to have not only a good understanding of the language, but also the concepts and things as well, so they can choose the right words to translate the idea over.
Yeah, which is,
I think that's always a problem.
Why the mithras liturgy got called the mithras liturgy, because the guy was thinking in that frame. If he'd been thinking, no, this is actually a piece of theurgy, then it might have come out differently. And for this reason, when I started reading bits in translation, I realized that there's a lot of inconsistencies in there. Apart from the fact that not each, but a number of them have been done by a different translator who had different objectives. So I went and learned classical Greek, or actually the Greek of that period.
Yeah, isn't it from what I've seen? I mean, because my original lessons for Greek were in Attic, so I learned Attic Greek first. I tried to learn Homeric Greek a little bit more because I like the Iliad and the Odyssey. But I think the PGM is mostly in like Koinik, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Homeric, well, life is too short to go.
It's like the real problem with it is that it's not so much the dialect, it's just the meter of it that you need to get a hang of, and that's the difficult part a lot of the time. But
yes, I started in Attic as well as you, and then went on to Koine because that's obviously what is written in, and as a side effect, you can read the New Testament. But if you wish to, it's roughly the same period. So you have to go back, and then when you go back, you see that there are about 60 different types of magic in that collection of manuscripts, and the translation is the following spell.
Right, it's spell or charm or whatever, and it's
the following charm. It wasn't a spell, and it wasn't a charm. It was, to bring a nubile woman to you who you'd spotted and you wanted to influence, but there was a separate Greek word for each of these operations. It means that the Greeks actually had a vocabulary of magic, which we don't have anymore.
Right.
The same thing is true of Euclidean geometry. When Dee collaborated with somebody who was translating Euclid's books, and instead of looking in the dictionary, because there was no such word for a rhombus, they just used the Greek word. We call it a rhombus, which is good because then you can actually go back and see where it came from. But with magic, instead of doing that, they called it a spell, because it doesn't matter, does it? Because magic's all fantasy as far as the academics are concerned.
This is continually been one of my major pet peeves with academia, in just how it's become about it. And usually, I think one of the best examples of it is Hermetic texts usually, because obviously when you look at Hermetic papyri as a whole, or the topic of Hermetica as a whole, for a lot of modern scholars, when we're studying them, we divide them as you probably know, into philosophical or technical Hermetica. And quite a lot of the philosophical Hermetica has been translated. It's the Corpus Hermeticum, it's the Asclepius, it's the definitions, the Armenian ones, all that kind of thing. And they've all been translated, and then fairly well, I think, right? But you look at any of the technical texts in the Hermetica, which are the ones that contain treatises on practical magic, on alchemy, on astrology, all that kind of thing. None of those have really been translated from Arabic into any of the modern texts. And while, again, you can make the whole linguistic argument in that there are a lot of translators who speak Arabic and English well enough to translate the concepts over, there's still that underlying bias of no one really cares enough to translate them because it's just magic. And if you look at, because philosophy, you can still get a degree, and it's still a more accepted field in academia rather than magic and alchemy and esotericism. So all the philosophical ones have been translated because it's valid, and then all the technical ones, which are actually probably more interesting,
and they're all safe philosophical ones,
right?
They're safe.
Yeah. So it's frustrating.
So you entered academia through archaeology, am I right?
Yeah.
Well, I went to take my PhD, and they asked me, which faculty do you want? Religious studies, history, or classics? And I thought, religious studies, no, thank you. Magic is not a religion. So I chose classics. So to go away and learn a few, or brush up in a few languages.
Like Greek and Latin mostly, yeah.
Well, Latin I did at school, but that needed a lot of brushing, and the Greek I went and took serious Greek, Koine Greek or Attic Greek initially classes, and then I felt I could do it, and then during my Viva or whatever, they sat me down and they said, well, no, it was before they allowed me to even take it. Do you believe in all this stuff? And I thought, I'm not going to fall into this trap. And I said, no, I just want to examine the progress of methods from the ancient Egyptians through the Greeks to Northern Europe. Just the methods? Yes, just the methods. And I just want to document them, which is in fact what I did do in my thesis.
Yeah.
I didn't give helpful hints on practical. That I ended when I turned them back into books.
Yeah.
And I had to tell that lie just to get on board. And I'm on board now. Now I don't have a connection to a university. I can speak with.
Yeah, you're not bad. They can't exactly take your PhD away now, can they?
No. At least I hope they don't change the rules. But anyway,
yeah, that's true.
But apart from that small pretense, I did say that I wanted to study the progress of magic right the way through from ancient Egypt till about 1700. And then the next objection was that is too wide a subject. So
yeah, I can see that, but at the same time, go on.
That's what I said. I said that I can see that, but the necessary connections had never been made, and that's what I want to make.
Yeah,
because the methods are the same. The language changes, some of the names of the entities change.
Yeah.
In Chinese magic, entity names change quite a lot. But you can still access a particular entity with a particular name. And so I said, no, I wanted to show the transference of the technology.
Right.
As in Greek, the techne,
The techne, yeah.
Yeah. And so they let me pass on that, and a few other more difficult questions.
Yeah, but yeah, you can take sort of I guess you could make an argument that you're taking a linguistic approach. You're looking at it from a sort of philological perspective.
I should have, but then they'd say, "Oh, well, you're in the wrong faculty for that." So, I
suppose, yeah, that's true.
So through classics, I got in.
Fair enough. I mean, it all worked out in the end. That's the main thing, right? But
yes, indeed.
Yeah, I think I was reading a book the other day. I can't remember who's by. Christopher. I can never pronounce the last name. Christopher Placience, I think.
Yeah.
And it's on.
I know.
Gone.
I vaguely know him. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I think he got his master's or his PhD from Exeter, actually. So that when Exeter still had its esotericism department, I don't know if they still do
anymore. Yeah.
No, but I think that's where he really got it from. But he wrote a book on divine evocation in the Greek Magical Papyri. So I guess the Egyptian planeta, right? So the appearance of the god. But it was really interesting because he argues, at least in his introduction, there's a really interesting point where you really, when you're looking at magic, we can look at it from an essentialist definition or a linguistic definition. And the essentialist is sort of the very general viewpoint where it's just like you have like the basic three, like magic, charm, spell, anything like that. Whereas if you look at it from the linguistic definition, you define it based on the vocabulary that the magicians in a particular culture are using for their own things. So like when you look at the Greek, like you said, all the Greek magicians, there are over 90 odd different types of spells with their own different head words that tell you exactly what they are in Greek, and they all sort of break it down. And when you look at it like that, it really does become more of a technology. It does become more of a science because it's much more defined rather than just saying it's all magic or it's all a prayer or it's all a charm or anything like that.
Different specific methods to create different specific outcomes. Again, like chemistry, you don't just put it all in the cooking pot and stir. Otherwise you get nothing. You've got to put in specific ingredients, and even then in specific proportions. Right.
Yeah. It's one of those things. I think like one of the best. I think the example he uses actually, which is one of the best ones I've seen, is the huge character issue around Circe in the Odyssey, right? Because there is a huge, especially if you look at any sort of the modern neo-pagan things and Wicca, or any sort of modern Hellenic paganism movements or anything like that, they all hold very tightly to this idea that Circe is a witch, or that she is the titan or goddess of witchcraft or anything like that, which honestly actually more belongs to Hecate. But most people identify that Circe is a witch. But you look at the original Greek in the Odyssey, the title that she's given is Polypharmakos. It's not witch, and Polypharmakos is just like knower was a knower of many herbs.
Yes.
Right, so she's just a lady who like either apothecist in the forest, right? And it's so funny to me how interpretive Greek can be as a language, because like you look back at some of the older translations from like the 1900s of Homer's Odyssey, and you have things. I think it was Ryu who does one translation where he says that Odysseus is on his way to the witch's castle. And when he's going towards Circe, then you look at the original Greek and it's like, okay, one, she's not a witch, and two, it's not a castle, it's actually a palace, but it's fine, we'll ignore it. But it's its own challenge,
Yeah, but then unfortunately, translators from even this era feel they can take any liberty with magic, because magic's not a real thing, is it?
Right.
We can play around, and it's like fantasy writing, and it could be sci-fi from the Middle Ages, but it's not. It's it's That's wrong.
No? I've heard this theory. So God, clarify for me.
You are rising to the level of the god.
Right.
Theurgy is so much harder, where you can actually communicate with him. Minor spirits and demons, sure, you can attract to you, and then you might associate them with the agoge spells, but not theurgy. Sorry, I'm taking a very specific point of view there, because
no, it's great. This is the clarity that people need. I think that's the whole point of it, right? Because I think the other thing is when you look at I think it's Goetia. Isn't it? All the Greek root of Goetia is the practice of the Goes, and the Goes. I've seen some arguments that it's derived from. I don't know if I call it necromancy, because necromancy is again another abused term, I think.
Yes. Completely changed in its meaning.
Yeah. I think it goes back to the Middle Ages, right? I think all the early patristic period, where all the early church fathers were they argued that you couldn't. Because I think it's in the Middle Ages it got conflated with, I think it's like nigromancy, like the black art.
Yes,
and then they just started applying the word necromancy to all kinds of spirit summoning rather than just the dead.
Yes, because nigromancy and necromancy sound the same, but of course they're not.
Right.
And then you've even got modern practitioners who start saying that all spirits are actually the ghosts of the dead. Human, which is not true either. Completely different entities.
Yeah, well, I guess I suppose this is one that can help people then. So we talked a lot about the different kinds of spirits in passing, but there is a very sort of set hierarchy, I guess. Well, maybe set is the wrong word, but there is a stable-ish hierarchy to magical practice, especially if we look at the Greek magical papyri.
Yes. In fact, the Greek magical papyri, in a way, demote a lot of the traditional gods to the level of spirits or entities.
Yeah, I've noticed this a lot, especially the Greek gods. They appear in a lot more what I would categorize or what I know as like Greek folk magic than they do in sort of classic Hellenic paganism.
Which surprised me initially. Where's the respect for the old gods gone?
Yeah, because I think you don't. Because again, I think one of the things that is interesting about it is like we can definitely see the Egyptian custom of threatening the god into action almost, which I feel like is it doesn't make sense in our sort of our modern cultural context. Like people really have a hard time wrapping their head around the fact that in order to get things done, you need to bind the god or threaten it into action.
Well, you may either coax it or threaten it, but you definitely have to bind it, because once it is bound, it will come back when you call it. I think I've got a lot of practical evidence that that's the case.
Yeah.
And then people who don't bind it find that the operation doesn't work because it doesn't feel constrained. It goes, that's interesting.
And then it just kind of walks off. It's like, yeah, okay. Like, yeah, whatever.
I'm out of here,
Yeah. I suppose this is, again, it goes down to the methodology, I suppose, and we can talk about this a little bit. But I think every single thing is significant when you're doing these kinds of rituals, right? Because you have to do the invocations to specific directions, especially and even at like planetary times and associations and that kind of thing. So you do it at particular times. You use particular corresponding incenses. You do it to particular directions. And I think this is something you've mentioned before, where again, because people see magic as a kind of fantasy idea, they kind of see it as some as you can kind of imagine it as a cartoon where it's like you're reading an invocation in one direction, the spirit will kind of just pop up and wherever it wants will pop up behind you and give you a fright or whatever. It's like, no, like the directionality of things is part of technology. It's part of an ingredient.
Yes, you should be facing the correct direction so that it doesn't pop up behind you.
Yeah, because you have different associations. I think, for example, Paimon in the Goetia, or King Paimon, I should say. I hear he's, from what I've heard other magicians say, he's a bit touchy about the title, apparently. But he's usually considered a king of the West. But I think in the Lemegeton, he's considered Northwest. So the triangle moves. So there are tons of different associations for all the different cardinal spirits.
Yeah, well, the number of variations, according to the number of scribes that can't read what they're copying from in some cases.
Yeah, because I think Paimon is one of the oldest, isn't it? Like he's one of the most consistent that I've seen in the cardinal kings.
Whereas Oriens is almost certainly a confusion between the Latin word for the direction it comes from.
Yeah. So Oriens is I guess it's Orient, isn't it? Orientalis, which is east. Yeah. So who is the original Eastern king? Do you know?
Yeah, Oreus. Like Egyptian serpent.
Yeah.
And then he comes from the east, and then suddenly writing on the circle the direction and the name of the spirit, the two got conflated. I think that's pretty certain.
Yeah. So I suppose I could see, because if you have on the inner circle the Latin for east, and then on the outer circle the demon king, I suppose you can they look somewhat similar. It's an interesting one. Yeah, I suppose, because in terms of so if we take sort of a practical point of view for a second, when you're sort of going into like what is your current ritual setup now? I mean, if you're open to sharing that, is it so you have I assume sort of the Dr. Rudd circle? That's probably one of your go-tos.
Well, I've got a big 18-foot circle, but not in London. Sadly, I have left it in my place in Asia. Yeah,
well, I gotta say, because especially in London, finding a 20-foot bedroom in London, I can't imagine that's easy.
Impossible. Yes.
Yeah. So you have, or I guess historically speaking, I guess in this case, you have sort of the magic circle. Then did you construct that and consecrate it, I guess, prior to all the operations?
Yes, this is 30 years back. I painted it.
So you're using the same. Do you still use that same one
for important operations? Yes, because and so I painted it with a friend. he did the heavy duty backgrounds because it's large. We actually put it on hessian and canvas.
Yeah.
So it survived, and I painted the Hebrew and so forth. So we used that a number of times, and I've used that since for the more important operations.
Yeah, because I've read some more modern versions of Goetic books, but they say that you should construct the circle new every time.
No, you'd go mad if you had to repaint that circle.
Yeah, that's my idea with it, because it doesn't make sense. Like, you can get a good stable one that's good lasting, then I think that's fine. Because again, if you're having to create it every time, I guess you would have to reconsecrate it every time as well, which is
just not practical.
Yeah,
it's like the sword or any of the other pieces of equipment. So much labor involved in producing them that you're better to stick with it. So in the case of the circle, it folds up, and I've kept it all this time and used it a number of times.
Yeah. Is it how important is color in this? Is your one colored, or is it just?
It is colored, but it's not important.
Right, that's interesting.
The important is the Hebrew names of gods, the sigils, the words. Magic is very much involved in words.
Yeah.
And initially I thought, well, why should that be? But it actually is very much.
I suppose you can. I was talking with. There's actually, where is it? Let me find. I was teaching a course the other day. We were teaching a lesson, and we covered the Chaldean oracles, and there is a section in there. Here we go. Yeah, there was this passage in. This is just Magick's translation. But I don't know how much you know about Chaldean oracles. But obviously, it's in the same way that there is the hierarchy of spiritual entities, and you have these figures, the Inges or the Ingines, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And they're kind of, I guess the best way I can describe them is like they're like the thoughts of the divine mind, or the thoughts of the Father, or whatever you want to say. But she makes a point of saying, for example, as the thoughts or ideas of the Father, the Inges are actually magical names, the Orcus Mystique, sent forth by the divine mind or by the Father as the couriers in order to communicate with the theurgist. At this end, the magic wheel is spun as the theurgist attracts the celestial Inges, which then enable the theurgist, who alone is privy to the divine language of the gods, to communicate directly with the divine mind. But the message communicated by the Inges is none other than their own magical names, which, when uttered, enable the theurgist to acquire certain divine power.
Yeah, because the words and the thoughts, I won't say materialize into the.
I think that's part of the reason. When you look at all the divine names in the PGM, like when it's really interesting having studied Egyptian first, and then looking at the Greek divine names in the PGM, I can see exactly what's happening, and it's a Greek scribe trying to transliterate an Egyptian saying or an Egyptian word, and they're doing it phonetically.
So you learned Demotic or what?
Well, I actually started with Middle Egyptian incorrectly. So I did 2 years pretty much of Middle Egyptian. And then I went into late Egyptian, and then I learned Coptic, or I've learned Coptic more or less since I left. And since leaving, I've realized I should have done it completely the other way around. And you should learn Coptic first, then late Egyptian, Demotic, and then Middle Egyptian, which is a lot easier, which is a bit frustrating, but I'm where I'm at now. So it's its own thing.
So tell me, what are you doing now? You say you were teaching. So is this part of your...
Yeah. So, I graduated back in 2020, pretty much, or late 2019, I should say, actually. Then I was going to go traveling for a year. I had this sort of big planned out where I planned out a bunch of different magically and historically significant sites, Eleusis, all those kinds of places that I was going to go to, but then COVID hit. So none of that happened. But then I ended up joining another company, or another sort of a big sort of YouTube-based company, and I was with them for sort of the past year and a half, and I was writing a lot of YouTube episodes or just journal articles and that kind of thing. for them on certain spiritual topics. And then I went out, and after I left them, and this was sort of fairly recently, two and a half months ago, I left them, and then I went and founded my own, I guess we could say, startup, my own business, my own platform.
Mistai?
Yeah. Which is the Greek word for initiate. Or I guess the Attic, or the Attic, but the Greek word for initiate in general. And then Mistai is because we only started like 2 months ago. Like we're still figuring out exactly what it is. But at the moment, I'm teaching courses and stuff on magic in general, but specifically sort of ceremonial magic. And we're halfway through one course at the moment, and I've done a lot of magical history, which is kind of interesting. Then I'm trying to find a way of, at the moment I'm in this spot of getting different courses together. There's one on Hermeticism, Hermetic Papyri. There's one on this main one that we're doing, which is on ceremonial magic or magic in general, going from sort of no background in magic whatsoever up to ceremonial. I am also, it is kind of a more general one at the moment. So I am also throwing in elements of traditional witchcraft as well, because a lot of even though my main magical practice, I came in through archaeology and came into ceremonial, in the past year and a half, I've also dived into traditional and sort of, I guess you could say, sabbatic witchcraft as well, just to see what it's like and that kind of thing. And it's kind of interesting, all the different, parts of it are very different, but also, again, parts of it are very, very similar. And it's also kind of fleshing out my understanding of ceremonial magic and how spells work, I guess you can say, quote unquote. I really don't like using the word spell. But yeah, so I'm in a spot where we're just doing a lot of courses, but at the same time as well, I'm collating together just a big library of, whether it's grimoires, manuscripts, anything like that, to make it available for either academic study or practicing occultists to come and get access to all of these kind of things. But it's a big job,
Oh, definitely. And it's going to take a long time before practicing occultists and academics get their act together.
Yeah, it's well, I have my dreams. It's fine.
I think that's a great dream. However long it takes, it'll be worth doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So what other things do we want to talk about today?
Well, actually, we have now burned up 1 hour and 20 minutes.
Oh wow, we really are going for it. There you go. All right, well, we can start drawing this to a close then. I guess the other big thing. So if we were to sort of, I guess the last sort of big discussion, if we were to bring this back down to a very grounded, practical element, and we were to sort of separate out the stages of a ceremonial ritual. So say, for example, people are coming into some sort of ceremonial magic or high magic for the first time, and they're sort of wondering what the general process is, all the different stages. Can we elaborate on that, do you think?
So of a particular ritual, or of bringing people into a group for that?
Let's do with the ritual. I think let's say you're working with a goetic spirit, because I mean we can go back time and time again. We can go back to we can go back to the PGM, and the PGM has its own kind of practice thing with it. But I think if we start with the Goetia and the goetic ritual, and then work our way backwards and see if we can wrap up with that, that'll make good sense.
Yeah, the pity about the PGM is that now do the usual. This is never specified.
Right. Yeah. This is always the challenge, I think. And we don't know what the usual is, which is quite frustrating.
If we talk about goetic rituals, so let's see. Well, first of all, you're going to need to have the equipment. You may use a sword, you may use a wand, but you need to clear the space, and you can't work in a flat with other people there, because if you get a successful evocation, you are going to cause trouble. At least for the people on the same floor as you, if it's a multi-story.
Do you speak from experience?
Yes.
Wonderful.
My preference is to do it out in. I've done it in a couple of old places. Like there was an old faux folly castle in Bath, up on the hills behind, which you're nodding. Does that mean you know it?
I've heard. I think I've heard this story. I think I've heard you tell it before.
Okay, so we did a couple of evocations there, and that was successful because we were well away from humans, and you can't hear the traffic noise, and you don't want to hear these things. You just want to concentrate on what you're doing. Alternatively, a large house, empty. Tell your relatives to bugger off for the whole night. Or Steve Sabdow used to use a warehouse.
I've read, because his I think his new book on gratification just got republished, isn't it, for the next another edition?
Yes, it did. Yeah. So he's one of the modern magicians who will work at it hard and take risks, and he has done so. I've taken risks and had a few prominent disasters. So you've got to be well protected, and I was certainly well protected with my old 18-foot plus circle, and with various weapons that have been consecrated. Not the 4 Golden Dawn ones, but the sword is essential.
Yeah,
because it's iron, and spirits do seem to worry about being cut with sharp iron, and I don't know why. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, because I mean, you have. I don't know. It's really interesting because iron is always traditionally in the middle of Mars, right?
Yeah.
But so is there like a Martian association with it? Because even then, I can't remember, because when you're invoking, I can't remember if you're invoking the Martian or any of the Martian spirits in general, or if you're making use of like planetary cameo or anything like that, then they actually recommend to not use iron because of that same thing. They don't like the iron.
They fear the iron. So even a martial spirit doesn't really want you to slash him with a sword. The thing about the sword is you can reach beyond the boundary of the circle.
Yeah,
I have made. I never attempt to go beyond the boundary of the circle. I'm not interested in causing that kind of damage to myself.
Yeah.
So you need some of the equipment, and I won't go into details of the other things you need. You then definitely need the right incense, because spirits do have a sense of smell. It's like the ancient Egyptian temples. They forbade anybody to come in who had eaten fish recently or a garlic. And in fact, if you've smelled anybody badly cooking fish, or somebody or just rotten fish, it's an appalling smell.
Yeah.
Spirits do not like that. So if you wanted to get rid of a spirit very rapidly, you'd open a seal.
Just burn some very bad smelling stuff. Yeah.
Asafoetida is the popular one to get rid of.
Yeah, it reminds me, because I think it's in the book of Tobit? I think Solomon burns like catfish entrails to get rid of Asmodeus.
Fish entrails, exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
So whatever physicality the spirits have, they definitely have their sense of smell, and they definitely can hear, because evocations can affect them. I don't know about touch. I've never been touched by one. I don't particularly want to be touched by one.
Yeah, I imagine. Well, it would be difficult if you're inside the circle, right? Because they can't get inside anyway.
Eliphas Levi allegedly got touched by one, and he had a frozen arm for the next couple of weeks after that. But that's hearsay.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about senses, what's your take on how you hear them, or how they speak? So, is it like a physical voice that you hear, or is it one of those things that you see a lot again in all the chaos magic ideas, where you'll hear their voice inside your head as if it's like your own thought, or is it like a physical sound?
I got a quite distinctly different sound inside my head, which would then tend to suggest it's all psychological. But
sure,
I have never heard one physically.
Right.
I have other people I've worked with who say that they can hear, but I'm not sure about that. But communication in words happens, and it's not like I just had a thought about something. In fact, I've tried doing things like concretely thinking about mixing concrete whilst listening to the spirit, or eating food whilst listening to the spirit. It doesn't matter what I visualize, the sound comes over the top. And so I've long since stopped trying to do that.
Yeah. So in your experience with I guess with evoking different entities, do they have different voices and different sounds that they come through with?
Yes. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, some of them are rather scrambled in their speech, and some of them refuse to talk. They just stand there. And yes, I've had visuals, mute. And so I find that then you charge them with what you want them to do, and you ask, do you accept this? Do you vow to do this? And there will be some external phenomena, like something will drop from the ceiling, or, and by something, I mean, it could be a piece of rubbish, it could be anything, but there will be a concrete response.
Yeah, something. Usually, I think I'm thinking back to my own evocations. I think the two biggest ones, or the two biggest environmental indicators, or maybe one is that I've seen that for me indicates that a spirit is present is one, there is some kind of lighting fluctuation in the room, and it's not so much like a physical light with like a light switch, but it's just like there's like
I'll tell you what it is.
Something, you know what I'm talking about, like something just like it either brightens or darkens the room.
Sparkling air.
Yes.
That's what I see most frequently. It's not thousands of little pinpoints or anything, but the air just becomes sparkly.
Yeah, it's just brighter.
I'm glad you have had the same experience.
Yeah, and then the other one that I usually hear is usually when, or around the same time, or not so much at the end of the ritual when I'm charging them, but when they are starting to appear, is a sound. The best way I can describe it is it's not so much a singing bowl, it's kind of like a bell sound, like a tinkling.
You're absolutely right.
That shows up when that's usually at the beginning. So when they first go, like after I've repeated either the first or second conjurations, if we're going by the Lemegeton, usually around that sort of time there'll be and it's one of those weird sounds where it's like the more you focus on it, the more distant it gets.
Well, I was just going to say the word distant. It sounds as if it's happening down the other end of the street or something, but
right, or like in another room. It's like a really quiet tinkling bell sound. That's what. Yeah, no, that's really weird. Okay, cool.
But these things are real. So the fact that you've had the experience and I've had the experience is not that we both invented the experience. It's that they actually happened to us.
Right, and this is the thing I want to point out. This is me and Dr. Skinner have never met before. We've never had this discussion before, and neither of us knew that we shared these experiences, right? Like again, like we don't know each other. This is the first time we've met, so this is really interesting.
Yes, and I'm sure there would be other things.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, and with regards to the academics, another thing that my chemistry professor father-in-law once said, it sounds to me like these guys are chemists who've never actually touched a test tube.
Well, in terms of magicians or spirits?
Academics.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
They're talking about chemistry, but they've never touched a test tube. He said, in his field, it's known who are theoretic chemists and ones who are actually practical chemists.
Yeah, it's the whole debate of being like armchair magicians, and like you can't whether you can call yourself an occultist unless you actually practice. And if you don't, you're probably more of a scholar.
Yes.
But yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, yeah, it's a difficult. It's one. I mean, it's one of those things you can either. I always find it really hilarious because when you have to battle that always constant tidal wave of people going, well, magic's not real or witchcraft isn't real, and it's just like I love to go back at people when they come at me with that, and I was like, okay, have you actually tried it? As in, have you actually done a ceremony? Have you actually tried a ceremonial ritual where you've done it at the correct time, you've burned the correct incense, and done all these things? And no one ever has, right? They just make the assumption it's not real. And then when you ask them to try it, they're like, well, why would I try it? It's not real. There's like, do you see the problem I'm having here, right? It's just that's the mindset.
Worse still, I can't try it. I might be possessed. To which the answer is, possessed by what? If it's just fantasy, you can't.
Sure, right. This is the thing. Or like, and again, and even if you go in even if you go into spiritual circles or modern spiritual circles, people are always in that mindset of doing the occult or working in the occult opens up negative forces. It opens you up to darker forces. And I was thinking about this the other day because even with Mistai, right, because I'm teaching courses on occultism, I've had my fair share of people telling me that I'm a black magician, that I'm, I don't know, sacrificing goats or doing some other weird stuff, right, or I'm practicing black magic. And it's like, you look at occultism, or you look at magic in general, it's like, sure, am I going to sit here and tell you that it's completely safe, that you're not, by doing a ceremonial ritual, you are not opening the door to some very powerful, probably very dark forces at times? No, absolutely not. You absolutely are. You absolutely are. You're opening the doors of some very, or can be very terrifying experiences. But at the same time, while it opens the door, ceremonial magic or high magic also gives you the power to put them down. It gives you the power to bind them and control them and make use of them to do things. So it's like, people don't want to have that discussion, because I think this is one of the biggest aspects of magic is that it is a very amazing tool for self-empowerment. Because you're not reliant on other religions, you're not reliant on gurus for things. You go and have your own experience. And you don't have to read it from a book. You can go and summon these entities yourself and see what happens with them. People don't want to have that discussion. So
yes, teaching magic, that is very difficult.
Yeah, especially over Zoom. I would much rather be doing it in like an actual space, right, a physical space. But we work with what we have, I guess.
Well, Zoom Zoom is great. We're having this conversation because
sure.
I would not have necessarily. Where do you live in? Where are you located?
I'm in Kent, so I'm about half an hour outside of London.
Oh, right. I thought you were in America. No, you're here.
No, I'm here. I'm in England. Yeah.
Okay. But we can have these conversations. And so it's one of the few advantages of COVID that it's pushed ahead the remote working.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an interesting one. I guess we could start wrapping up soon as well. Have you ever done any rituals over Zoom?
No.
Okay. So I was going to say, because this is an interesting one. I've had, especially in when I've been teaching or when I've been in class, and we've done like group ceremony or group ritual. There's never anything ceremonial, because I wouldn't do that over Zoom anyway. But other like little rituals and that kind of thing. There is an interesting like discrepancy that happens with Zoom, where every single time I do a ritual, or in some way the Zoom lags out, or there's some glitch on people's computers and things like that, but the magic somehow does affect the tech, which is really funny. It depends.
Way back when there was reel-to-reel tape recorders, I desperately tried, even with the best equipment, to record rituals. And like you say, almost inevitably, the thing would fuck up.
Yeah.
And at one stage, because one of the university guys who ran their sound labs for languages, he made one sound lab available to me, and then he was part of the operation. We did a 4-person evocation, and he had the best equipment at that time running, and it just failed to record.
Yeah.
So yes, another shared experience.
These things can work on the tech or whatever. You see it in horror movies and stuff all the time. But you get more like electronic voice phenomena and things like that. If you set up cameras or anything. Have you ever done that in your practice? Have you ever filmed any of your rituals to see if you've got anything?
No, I got past that before handheld video cameras came into.
I see. Right. I gotcha.
Have you?
Yes, I have filmed rituals before. And I have some on my hard drive, but it's a lot of the time, because when you go into a room and you have candles lit and stuff like that, unless you have like a night vision camera on, you're not going to pick up a lot of things anyway. I have got one or two times I have got the kind of shimmery, sparkly thing happen on camera, which has been pretty fun. It's actually one of the most clearest times that I had that happen. I was working with PGM, and I was doing a working with Aphrodite in it, where I was kind of evoking Aphrodite in manner of speaking. And what was really interesting is the main sort of indicator of her presence, I guess you could say, like the theophany of it, was that the entire room just kind of sparkled, and it was kind of weird, because it was all of this kind of dust, or what looked like dust, kind of like shot up around the circle that I was in. But what was really interesting is that the bright dust stuff was only inside the circle. It wasn't outside of it. which was really weird. And then I snapped it on picture. And then what's even funnier is I went back to the PGM afterwards, and about 3 or 4 lines down, it actually says one of the indicators of her presence is a noticeable brightening of the room that you're in. So you go back to you have these experiences. You go back to the text, and then it
find that recorded there from somebody else. Yeah,
right. And it's like 1,000 years ago, and it's insane. It's insane to think about that these are consistent practices, and it's the same thing as you obviously we find a lot of spells in a PGM that involve like engraving hecate or something on gemstones or lodestones or anything like that. And then we go, and then in archaeologically speaking, there are tons in the British Museum. We actually have them. We found them, right, of like actual Greek magicians who have inscribed. And what's really cool is you flip the stones over, and they're inscribed with Aktiophis or Ereshkigal or Mene or anything like that, which are all divine names for Hecate in PGM. And it's like we actually have physical evidence for this stuff being practiced, which is insane.
I don't doubt that these are practicing magicians' records. Is in a way a definition of grimoire, isn't it? The practicing magician's records.
Yeah.
Rather than a third-party description of what might have happened.
Yeah, because they're written. I think that's the thing, where because when one of the challenges that we have when we're reconstructing magic is, again, a lot of when we try and reconstruct it, the general viewpoint is to try and find the things that were written by the magicians themselves. Because the problem we have with Gnosticism, where all of our at least before the discovery of Nag Hammadi, the vast majority of our texts are all anti-Gnostic propaganda. So you have to work our way back. So then, because of all the book burnings and all the suppression by the mainstream church, however you feel about it, we don't have a lot of the magical things. So really the only way to work through it and reconstruct these things are by using the grimoires, which are written by the magicians themselves.
Performing the operation.
Yeah, and probably a lot of time, probably even while they're performing, especially any of the ones that have have sigils written in or anything like that. There's a good chance, if you look somewhere at the Liber Spiritus or the Book of Spirit, that kind of thing, a lot of them they were written like while the procedure was going on, because you get this kind of like, I guess what we say, like an astral imprint of the sigil, and then you kind of trace over it, and that's what gives them the signature or something like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and then that's part of the binding.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. All right, yeah. All right, I think we could probably call it that. I think how long are we going? Nearly 2 hours, actually. 10 minutes over. So yeah, this was great. This was an amazing discussion. Okay. Thank you so much for coming on, Stephen.
I enjoyed sharing previous experiences, and you've done the work. You've learnt the Greek. You performed the stuff.
You get that. I mean, I won't lie to you. My Greek is a little rusty by now because I haven't really practiced since leaving academia, as much as I'm trying to sort of reconstruct the PGM stuff. But I think I if I had my way with properly teaching people, I would do a class on ancient Greek before I introduced them to the grimoires. But again, that takes. I know not everyone has the dedication or the background in order to be able to do that. So it's its own thing. But
you could create a 3-year university course with the necessity of knowing Latin and Greek.
Oh, don't tempt me. Magical university. Don't tempt me, Stephen. It's going to happen at some point.
Yes. It may not be called Hogwarts, but it.
No, we can figure out some kind of name for it. But we'll see how it goes.
Okay. Well, listen, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed this conversation, and the difficulty was not keeping it flowing. The difficulty was stopping it from continuing.
Yeah, that tends to be the case when you get started, But yeah, I mean, we can stay in touch. And if we have another episode or something, or we need some advice on the ceremonial stuff, I can drop you an email.
Yeah, and vice versa.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. All right. Thanks for coming on, Steve.